Okay, so with the Sonic the Hedgehog marathon done and over with, it's finally time to get to a series that a lot of you wanted me to tackle since I first introduced the month of gimmick for this channel. Well, first and foremost, this ain't going to be a month of. Why? These two games. I will leave it at that. Now, I've been well familiar with the Zelda franchise since the early 90s, but I'm certainly not what you would call a Zelda fanatic. I do own quite a number of Zelda titles, but they're definitely not games I'll religiously play over and over again. I have my fun with the series, but these are the type of games that I'll play and complete and then maybe wait a few years before picking it up again. For this marathon, we're going to be tackling the first 5 console games released for the series. I won't be tackling any handheld games, so for those of you wondering if I'm going to tackle games like Link's Awakening, then I'm sorry, but not just yet. Well, we have a lot of ground to cover. Fortunately, I don't think these reviews will be as extensive as the Sonic the Hedgehog marathon reviews were. So for those of you that found my reviews of the Sonic the Hedgehog games back then to be quite exhausting, then I think you'll be able to breathe easier this time. Or not. We haven't exactly gotten started yet, but let's not waste any more time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Legend of Zelda Marathon.
Mr. Miyamoto, we meet again. Or should I say, Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka. Alright, well, Takashi Tezuka was also part of the development of Super Mario Bros., but I think he had a more significant role this time around. Not only did he help design this game with the assistance of Miyamoto, but he was also the writer for this game. Yeah, the story isn't exactly what you would call grand at this point, but still, it's something, right? Despite being produced around the same time as Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda didn't debut until February of 1986 for the Famicom, about 5 months after Mario made his mark on the world. Instead of being a 2D platformer, The Legend of Zelda was an overhead game, with a much larger focus on exploration. There were no stages to complete, no points to accumulate, no lives, none of that. Your goal was to use your wits and courage to explore the open world, collect weapons and accessories to build up your strength, and solve the many puzzles and obstacles the game would persistently throw at you. I'm guessing since this game was developed in conjunction with Super Mario Bros., the story is rather similar to that game. I'm not too sure about that, but I think it's a safe assumption. The Prince Darkness Ganon has stole one of the Triforce with power and, yeah, you know what, this just screams early NES translation, so allow me to paraphrase, which would actually mean going into a bit more detail than what this intro screen offers. The land you travel in is known as Hyrule. The princess of this land is Zelda. One day, Zelda was kidnapped by Ganon, one end there, who was an evil wizard that held a piece of the Triforce in his possession. The Triforce as a whole is made of 3 separate triangles that each represent a different attribute: power, wisdom, and courage. Ganon is the holder of the Triforce of power, while Zelda is the wielder of the Triforce of wisdom. The Triforce of courage, well, as of this game, doesn't technically exist yet, so the Triforce in this game is pretty much a dual force. Ganon wants Zelda's Triforce all to himself, but before he can nab it and the princess, Zelda smashes the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces and scatters them all over Hyrule. Your role as the hero is to locate all pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, defeat Ganon, and save the princess. The hero can be named anything you want, but canonically the boy is known as Link, apparently because Miyamoto wanted this boy to represent the link between the game and the player. It makes sense, but I'm going to call him Johnny anyway. And Bort. Hey Bort. The name of the game is fairly simple. As Link, you'll need to travel all over the land of Hyrule to locate the 8 different dungeons scattered across the field, defeat the boss inside, and collect a piece of the Triforce located just beyond the boss room. The game structure is also fairly standard. Whatever is equipped to the B button, Link can use the B button, with the sword being applied to the A button. The hearts on the top right of the screen represent Link's health. The amount of damage Link takes really all depends on the enemy itself, so while a projectile from an Octorok may only deal about half a heart's worth of damage, a sword beam from a centaur may take away an entire heart point. When you begin your journey, Link can't do shit except walk. Luckily, a quick trip to the cave your eye should immediately be drawn to will score your first weapon, the wooden sword. Eventually, by conquering more and more dungeons, Link can not only obtain the means to travel through different regions of Hyrule, but he can also score additional weapons like a bow and arrow, or a boomerang, or a magical rod, along for long-range combat. Link can attack with his sword in a total of 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. When at full health, Link can shoot a beam from his sword, which is damn near essential for dealing with certain enemies. It also just makes your encounters with enemies easier overall, but I'll tell you, there's something very aggravating about getting hit and losing this ability until you're back at full health. When you're not attacking enemies, you can block enemy projectiles with your shield just by facing the attack. It won't block every projectile, but it does block a number of things, like arrows and rocks. You can later purchase a bigger shield that lets you block certain energy attacks as well, assuming you know where to buy for cheap. Besides dropping hearts to restore your health or the occasional fairy that restores a larger degree of health, enemies can also drop rupees, which is this game's currency. Located in many caves all across Hyrule are shops that Link can visit to purchase items to expand his arsenal. This can range from a candle, which you can use to burn bushes to discover secret passages, a ring which increases your defenses, bombs that can be used as a weapon or used to reveal secret passages, or the bigger shield like I mentioned earlier. Sadly, a lot of these items are pretty expensive, so in order to afford any of these upgrades to begin with, you'll need to collect a lot of rupees, or know where to locate secret shops that sell certain items at a discounted price. Now, collecting rupees doesn't necessarily have to be a chore, assuming you know where the best places are to collect them. In fact, there are secret rooms located all throughout Hyrule that not only contain methods of scoring a bunch of rupees at once, but also contain friendly creatures that award you a potentially big sum of rupees just for locating them in the first place. Unfortunately, the secret places are just that, secret, and in order to find any of these places, you need to know what bush to properly burn with your candle, that you first need to purchase by the way, or what mountainside you need to bomb. But you also need to be cautious of what bush you burn or what mountainside you bomb. Sometimes the secret room inside can contain a friendly guy who awards you rupees, and other times it can be a frenzied old fuck who forces you to pay out for the door repairs. Door repairs? It's a fucking bush! The process of finding these secret places can be tremendously mind-numbing, assuming you don't use a guide or map of any sort. Ladies and gentlemen, this game is something I like to call a guide game. A game I think you cannot possibly enjoy without some sort of outside assistance. When The Legend of Zelda was first released, it came with a detailed manual that offers you tons of tips and tricks that can make your journey a little more comfortable. The game itself even tells you to look up the manual for details. Without a guide, you're going to spend about 70% of your total game time absolutely confused with no idea where the hell to go. I consider it to be as bad as Simon's Quest in that regard. In addition to Hyrule not really containing any memorable set pieces, the game's map is totally worthless. Yes, that gray blank box on the top left side of the screen is your map of Hyrule.
Well, fuck that. This is pretty much required to find all the secrets and dungeons with ease.
Yeah, I know one of the main points of the game is to explore and discover these things on your own, but besides curiosity you would only achieve from extreme boredom, what exactly in this game compels you to use the candle to burn specific bushes or use bombs to blast specific walls? The answer? Nothing. If you didn't have the manual, you would never get the idea to do so, and without discovering these secrets, you would never come across those secret rooms where you could permanently increase your health, or nab a red potion that fully restores your life in an emergency. The most you will possibly find is an upgrade to your sword, which you may or may not be able to use because you first need to master it. Well, how the hell can I master something I can't use at first? Well, what the old man really means is that you need more hearts, which I can score by finding secret rooms or by defeating bosses at the end of the dungeon. The advice the old man can offer overall is downright baffling most of the time. Dodongo dislikes smoke. Well, who or what is a Dodongo? Is he a friend, a douchebag neighbor, a boss? Well, if you had the manual, you would know that Dodongo is a dinosaur that has a thick hide that repels normal attacks. With that hint, you could possibly get the idea to use bombs to kill it, but without it, well, I think at this point you get the gist of it. I'm all for a non-linear adventure, but this isn't what I would call a well-designed non-linear adventure. The only time things get a little more streamlined is when you're inside a dungeon, which not only sports a better map system than the overworld, but it does a better job establishing rules and how things work. It can still get pretty confusing at times, yeah, but dungeons overall are much smaller than the overworld in general, so it's only a matter of time before you discover the correct way to proceed. Except when trying to get past this guy in Dungeon 7. Give him the meat, that's what he wants.
Oh, come on. Surely it was obvious enough that grumble grumble translates to give me the expensive food that you can only acquire in a shop in the overworld, which you're not exactly sure on what it does without the manual, but you should have it in your inventory anyway. What's that? It wasn't? Well, fuck me.
Unfortunately, besides the game being the pinnacle of confusing, it's also pretty damn difficult. This is mainly because of two things: certain types of enemies you can encounter and Link's overall control. You won't have many issues to deal with in the overworld in terms of enemy encounters. Most of the time you're given enough room to breathe and strike enemies with ease. Dungeons, however, pull no punches. In the beginning it's not so bad. You got style foes who go down pretty easily, or little Hershey kisses that put up no fight whatsoever. But right around Dungeon 3 you're introduced to these assholes, Dark Nuts. Dark Nuts, why does that sound like a Portal version of Dark Knight? Anyway, these fuckers can't be attacked from the front, you have to approach them from either the side or behind. Problem is, they never stop fucking moving! And Link isn't exactly the most mobile fighter out there. Link is a tank when it comes to sword combat. He can't move and swing a sword at the same time, so you have to constantly pause to stab something. As such, it's very possible to lose a shitload of health just by accidentally running into these guys. With the proper upgrades like your bow and arrow or bombs, you can take these guys out with a little more ease, but then there are times where the game likes to throw a ton of these guys at you at once, and sometimes need to defeat all of them in order to progress further into the dungeon. That's a real pain in the ass. It also doesn't help that the game later introduces the blue variety, which not only hit harder, they also take more hits to kill. Then there are these little shits, Wizzrobes, who can seriously wreck your shit up in such a small amount of time, it can be a nightmare. Like Darknuts, there's two variations of them, but these guys like to teleport all over the place, and the blue ones never stop fucking moving! Christ, just stay still already! There's even these psychedelic disco skulls that can temporarily disable your attack if you touch them, leaving you to depend on your sub-weapons, which are, most of the time, not as effective as the sword. Combined with Link's somewhat stiff maneuverability, don't be surprised if your ass gets dogpiled by these jerks in later dungeons. Besides that, however, no other enemy really sticks out as annoying. Most of them go down pretty easily with just a few stabs. Even the bosses at the end of a dungeon are rather easy compared to the enemy combinations you faced earlier. The only one I don't really like is the Blue Goma, because the amount of projectiles that are thrown at you forces you to spend most of your time just dodging shit, instead of shooting an arrow into its eye. After collecting the 8th piece of the Triforce of Wisdom, we can head back to Death Mountain located at the top of Hyrule, where Ganon's dungeon awaits. Ganon's dungeon is the epitome of cruel. This place is enormous and filled to the brim with all sorts of enemies and ways to drain your health like nothing else. Take my advice, use a map. And I'm not talking about the one you find inside the dungeon itself, no, use a real fucking map on GameFAQs or something like that. Because Ganon's dungeon is also filled with a lot of dead ends, with a horde of Wizzrobes waiting to ambush you. Fresh meat, fresh meat, fresh meat. I feel so terrible for any kid in the 80s who played this game without a guide of any sort, or a friend who knew all the tricks of the trade. This place is that brutal. But even with the proper guidance, there's still a ton of shit you have to deal with just to get to the upgrades you can obtain, and finally Ganon himself. Thankfully, one of those upgrades you can obtain is the Red Ring, the final boost to your defense that also makes Link look like Saint Nick. The other upgrade is the Silver Arrow, which is mandatory if you want to complete the game. You see, if you don't have the Silver Arrows when you reach Ganon, you can't win! Only the Silver Arrow can deal the finishing blow to Ganon. Guys, the only reason why I'm not completely flipping my shit is because there was never a time where I attempted to play this game without a guide. It was because I had a map and a guide that I was able to enter Dungeon 1 with 6 hearts, the second sword, and the blue ring upgrade. It was because I had a guide and map that I was able to preemptively buy the food to feed the Goria in Dungeon 7 to bypass him, and it was because I had the guide and map that I was able to know that the Silver Arrow was required to beat the game, because this hint isn't exactly helpful. The Legend of Zelda, like I stated earlier, is a game I honestly think you can only enjoy with a guide and map. Without one, this game is barely playable. And maybe I'm just being a bit too harsh here, or maybe I've just been spoiled by other, better games in the series, but that's truthfully what I think. This game may have been amazing back in 1986, but in 2013, it's become very archaic. Well, by injecting Ganon with some Silver Arrow, that son of a bitch explodes, leaving behind the Triforce of Power. Beyond the upper door awaits Zelda, and by reigniting the two, the game is finally over. Well, actually, there's also a second quest you can tackle, which is essentially this game's hard mode, but if you used the guide and map the last time, it really shouldn't be that much harder. You can also start with the second quest immediately by entering your name as Zelda when you register your name. To this day, I have yet to actually attempt to complete the second quest, but I would need to be extremely bored to even think about doing so. I'd rather just move on to the next game at this point. Damn, did I really die 20 times during the Let's Play? Well, I think it's pretty obvious at this point, but I don't think this game has aged very well. Even with outside assistance, Zelda 1 is still rather ancient in terms of gameplay and structure. While Link is pretty efficient with handling threats, I don't think he's efficient enough. Hyrule is a bit too barren for my taste, and it doesn't help that people you are able to communicate with don't offer anything of real use, except for shopkeeps. Yes, that is expensive, good sir. The soundtrack is rather minimalistic, not just in terms of variety, but song length as well. I don't think there's one song in this game that lasts longer than 20 seconds without looping. However, I can kind of forgive that seeing that this is an early NES game, and I do legitimately enjoy most of the songs. The overall theme would later become the main theme for Link and the series in general actually, and it's something I never really tire of. I also really enjoy the credits theme, it's so goddamn catchy! Koji Kondo, stop doing this to me. I won't say much for the graphics, I think they've aged about as well as Super Mario Bros. Actually, and it isn't too guilty of copying and pasting for the sake of padding. Despite the game not being great now, back then it was a sensation. Like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda set a lot of standards and expectations and was responsible for the resurgence of a few genres, like action games and RPGs. While it didn't sell nearly the amount of copies as Super Mario Bros., the game left just as big of an impact. It was also one of the first games to utilize a battery backup, allowing players to save their progress without the need of passwords. Back in the day, something like that was mind-blowing, and it only further cemented the legacy this game obtained. Could I recommend this game to the casual gamer? No way in hell. I think this game requires too much of a specific setup to get the most enjoyment out of it, from a normal experience anyway. There are people who like beating this game without using the sword or some other self-imposed challenge, but that isn't the point. I think only video game enthusiasts should attempt to play this if they're interested enough. I wouldn't classify this as a terrible game, but you're going to need to be quite the patient and durable player to get past this one, if not because of the confusing structure, then for its sheer difficulty. Sorry Zelda 1 fans, but hey, at least the gold cartridge is nice to look at. I only wish there was a way I could record directly off of my NES top loader. I have no problem using the virtual console, but still, I know some of you can't stand to see an 8-bit game stretched to a 16:9 ratio. Well, blame the Wii U and Hot Pog, not me.
Alright, well that's one game done and over with. However, our adventures on the NES are not exactly done yet. Next up is Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. The Adventure of Link, was it? Isn't the first game an adventure? Doesn't it not count? Or well, I'm gonna get a cup of coffee. I need to prep for the adventure I'm ahead. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sonic the Hedgehog Marathon. We're doing it again, ladies and gentlemen.